Hello, I'm your host Jim McLean. Welcome back to another episode of the BanterFlix movie review show here on NvTV. Let's see what movies we'll be looking at tonight. This week's big release is Morbius, which is out in cinemas now. Our pick of the streams is the Academy Award-Winning Coda, which is available on Apple's streaming service. And we'll wrap up this week's show with our DVD of the week, Spider-Man No Way Home. So that's what we've lined up for you on this week's show, and joining me here in the NvTV studio is one of BanterFlix's own, our very own master storyteller, Darren Vincent. Hello to you, Darren.
Hi Jim, thanks for having me.
Not a problem, Darren. It's great to have you back on. We haven't had you on the show for quite some time. We have had the small matter of a pandemic, but things are getting back to normal, so we're getting you back on. We're going to be talking about movies, but as always, before we get into talking about our three movies, I thought we'd talk a bit of recent movie news, and I know it's a bit of a sad downbeat moment to start the show on, but we've had, since we last recorded the show, the news that Bruce Willis is going to be retiring from acting because of aphasia, which is something, a condition I have to admit I didn't know that much about, and apparently from Bruce Willis coming out and revealing this, or his family coming out and revealing this, the fact that he has trouble now communicating, he has trouble comprehending, so that has restricted his ability to act. I know over the past few years, quite a few people have been a bit sneery about Bruce Willis's cinematic output. I guess there have been a few people who have had to eat some humble pie. I know the Razzies have recently said that they are going to drop the worst Bruce Willis performance in a Bruce Willis movie. They've had to drop all that. So just your thoughts, Darren. I know it's been over a week, but your thoughts on the news?
Yeah, I just, when I heard it, I was completely almost heartbroken for him. You know, that's such a terrible thing to happen. But I guess he can look back on sort of his career and on the impact he's made on American cinema, and he's a worldwide star. Now, it's funny because we made that joke a few weeks back when we heard that those categories were announced, and I remember messaging other members of the BanterFlix team and going, you know, what are we putting our money on? But no, once I heard the news, I felt awful for even making that joke. And I guess, like, you know, it's times like this you realize that, you know, you can't judge anyone's situation until you really know what's going on in their mind, or maybe the reasons why they're doing something like that. So could it be that his choices were, you know, limited, or was he just trying to make as much as he could before the inevitable? But we'll never know. But I guess he can look back with his family and just enjoy his retirement and the impact he's made. So it's bittersweet. Yeah,
it definitely is. You know, in the past week, I've been looking online, and I've read some interviews with some of the directors of some of the films that people have been criticising him about, and talking about the limited availability that he would have on screen, that roles would have to be drastically cut and rewritten. I've watched a couple of those films, and you can see so much of that work is body doubles and stunt doubles. You can see that his performance on screen has been limited, and there's talk of, you know, having to use an earpiece to deliver lines. It is a very sad thing, and I guess it's that sense of, as you've mentioned, Darren, we have to think before we're so openly sneery, and I guess that brings me into a transgression of sorts when we talk about Will Smith. I guess we have to be careful, because we don't know what's going through people's head. I think this idea of the sneery nature and this cult nature of celebrity, we have to be careful, because I think mental health has never been more prominent. We've come through the pandemic. We hope people have talked about its effect on people's mental health. I'm not making a connection between the two, but I think it's important to take a step back and reflect on that when we want to kind of be so sneery and so critical of people. And I don't know if that's, maybe I'm making a jump too far, but just your thoughts on that, Darren?
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing. We've came out of that pandemic where, you know, the theme of sort of supporting each other and being kind and being nice to people was really the thing that got most people through that. Only for us to come out on the other side and sort of have learned nothing from it, which is sad. But with Will Smith, I guess that's a man that constantly has the media on him at all times. His family are superstars in themselves. They're worldwide famous too, and it must be a lot of pressure. We don't know, you know, something like that. Like for me, I come home from a stressful day at work and my girlfriend says something to me and I'm ready for running to my bedroom and crying some nights. But it just takes one thing, and I think that would set him off. And unfortunately, it just had to be on a global televised stage for him to react that way. And again, as I said about Bruce Willis, we don't know what's going on behind. We don't know the backstory. Was there anything previously between the two parties involved? We'll never know, but we're still waiting to see what will happen in the Academy too.
I know he's resigned, Darren, from the Academy. As you've said, we don't suspect that he will be asked to hand in his Academy Award. That hasn't happened with previous people who've been forced to leave the Academy for worse offences. I think it's putting it this time pre-Watershed. But as we said last week, it just left a huge shadow over, I think, what was largely a very progressive night for the Academy Awards. As I've already mentioned, we are going to be talking about Coda this evening, because I think it's only right that we give that film an opportunity to be showcased. But before we do have the rather small matter of this week's big release.
Can you control it?
I don't know.
Half the city wants to kill you.
We haven't had anything this good since that thing in San Francisco.
The other half wants to control you.
Hey, Dr. Mike, you and I should stay in touch.
I'd do anything to save a life. But I don't know what I'm capable of.
You save lives, you don't take them. Are you here to heal the world? Or to destroy it?
So that's a look at Morbius. It's out in cinemas now. We could have talked about Sonic the Hedgehog 2, but we decided to go with the more adult choice, Darren. For us, we are going heavy this week with comic book movies. We're talking about 3 films, 2 of them are comic book movies. This is the latest installment in Sony's own expanded Spider-Man universe. We have Venom. We've had the original Spider-Man movies. These may or may not be coming back into canon, as we will be talking about Spider-Man No Way Home with the Andrew Garfield stuff and the Tobey Maguire outings as the web crawler. Now we have the anti-heroes. We've had Venom, as I've mentioned. Now we have Morbius with Jared Leto. So we've seen the trailer. Darren, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, whenever I first seen the trailer, I was a bit, on the edge, almost with excitement, because I know Jared Leto can be such a charismatic actor when he's trying. I knew nothing about the story. I knew nothing about the origins of Dr. Michael Morbius. I just knew he could turn into a vampire, and sometimes he chases Spider-Man about and fights him. So I was looking forward to seeing that. And when I sat down in the cinema, I still don't think I'm any further on as to understanding the motives and sort of origin of this character. Now, I have to admit, I was saying earlier when we were coming into the studio that I think the hype got to Morbius. People were saying it was terrible, and I had some very low expectations for the movie, but it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Now, if you break it down and criticize everything, yes, there's a lot we could probably, do with a longer episode of this show if we're going to go into absolutely everything. But the story wasn't there at all. There was nothing that sort of brought me into the sort of emotional investment of any of the characters. And there was sort of no sort of crack or any sort of heart between any of them. I felt so sorry for Matt Smith, who's so talented, and he just is completely wasted in this movie. It's his first sort of dipping his toe into his first sort of superhero comic book character film, and I think he'd be quite reluctant to go back to it. The film relies heavily on really sort of mid-2000s CGI at times. A lot is happening. There's bats and everything flying about at once, and you can't really see what's going on because it's quite dark. And the film actually makes a point of slowing down to show you some of the action scenes. But other than that, I can't see any redeeming qualities to the movie, except that maybe it's not as bad as Fantastic Four. But Sony just seem to have no direction as to what they're doing with that side of the franchise, and be interesting to see what their next step is with that. But yeah, they really could do with a plan, and maybe a 5-6 year plan for these films, rather than just slapdash what have we got the rights to? Let's make a film for a quick cash grab.
Well, yeah, you've said a lot of things I agree with, Darren. Like, I don't think this is the worst film, the worst comic book movie as it's been dubbed by many. I just find that Jared Leto, who I did not like in The House of Gucci at all, you know, he gave a performance in that film that only at sometimes dogs could only hear. I just find he's perfectly serviceable in the lead role here, but it's just a generic script that's so uninspired. We have Matt Smith, who like you, I'm a massive fan of. I love his tenure as the Doctor. He's a villain for really only the convenience of the plot. I mean, he literally goes from being a friend and confidant to Michael Morbius to a villain in the flip of a coin. And there's no real explanation for it other than the fact that these vampiric powers turn him into the film's villain, because every superhero film needs a villain. And you said, I think you've been a little bit kind when you said it was mid-noughties for the special effects. The special effects aren't great. We'll be talking about Spider-Man No Way Home later on, but this felt like a very 90s vampire film. And we had Blade in the 90s. I would probably rather sit down and watch Blade than this. I don't know, and you've mentioned, Darren, about the fact that we have Sony seemingly having this plan, or lack of a plan. They seem to be obsessed, and I'm going to nerd out to an extent with the Sinister Six motive. We have DC's, we have their Suicide Squad, but they seem to be obsessed with this Sinister Six plans. We had this kind of derailed Andrew Garfield's tenure as Spider-Man. They tried so hard to set up Sinister Six, and here we have it again. I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say that Michael Keaton makes an appearance. It is a post-credit sting, despite it being featured heavily within the film's marketing campaign. But are you excited at all by the prospect of a new kind of Sony expanded cinematic universe?
For me, it depends on the direction they're going with, and one of the problems I have with, say, Suicide Squad was, as you said about a superhero is only as good as the villain he comes up against, and when you switch that around, if you have a team of supervillains to go after, what is their overall goal? And I know the first Suicide Squad struggled with that. They sort of redeemed a bit with James Gunn's reboot there recently, but I don't know if they have enough of that balance to do that, and enough of that investment from us too, whether we want to see that. Yes, it would be great, and it will get a bit of buzz, but it really just depends on what's behind it and where it's leading to in the end. As you said, Michael Keaton is another, it's out there, but that again just seems like it's a real opportunity taken by Sony just to say, right, we're just going to cash in on this sort of everything that Marvel Studios are doing, and we're just going to run with that, and it'll get more people in attendance. Sadly,
comic book movies do get bums on seats. As we've mentioned, I think this will probably do okay at the box office. Whether or not it'll justify a sequel and the kickstart this expanded universe that Sony are so eager to try and do. But anyway, look, we've talked enough about comic book movies. We are very comic book movie heavy this week, so I think we will take a break from all those, and we'll move on to this week's Pick of the Streams.
I want to do this.
There are plenty of pretty voices with nothing to say. Do you have something to say?
You will be required to have a hearing individual on board at all times.
I can't stay with you for the rest of my life. I've never done anything without my family before. All that I need to get by.
So that's a look at Coda, which is available now on Apple's streaming service, Apple TV+. Darren, I'm going to ask you right from the get-go. Apple TV+, I think you took a hit for the team this week. You subscribed for a free trial, like a lot of people have done in the wake of the Academy Awards. Have you been a subscriber to Apple TV before this? Were you interested in Apple TV? Or is it literally, have you watched Coda for the simple reason we ask you to watch it for this week's show?
Yeah, I agree. I have. I took the trial to watch Coda, and I've not once considered signing up to Apple TV Plus, just because there's just so many streaming services, and I have a huge watch list to get through. But I found myself, you know, what I have seen it. There's loads of stuff on there I do want to check out, and I know other services are available. But yeah, it's completely got me signed up to Apple TV Plus, and you know, that's exactly what they wanted it to do.
Yeah, I think it's a surprise that we were talking about this on last week's show. Netflix has been trying so hard for 3-4 years now to have that Best Picture award, and for Apple TV to come along and literally sideswipe with this film. And I had seen Coda before. You clearly haven't, Darren. You've watched it, as we said, for this week's show. I had seen it, as I mentioned in last week's show. My wife is training to do sign language, to be an interpreter, and we had watched it when we first heard about it. And I was pleasantly surprised. You know, the term Coda comes from child of deaf adult, and I have been a big fan of this film for quite some time, but I never, ever thought when I first watched it, and even when I rewatched it for this week's show, did I think that this was a film that would end up bagging the 94th Academy Awards, 94th, 95th, the Best Picture at the Academy Awards. So from watching it, having watched it purposely after the Academy Awards, what's your thoughts on the film?
Well, I have to say I was pleasantly surprised by it. It's one of those films with a lot of heart, you know, a lot of emotional core to it, and that comes from the relations between the family members. So the daughter Ruby, and the relations with her dad and her mum and her older brother, and the sort of problems that they face, not just because they are deaf, but you know, problems with, you know, the fishing community that they all work in, and you know, the daughter's getting through school, she's maybe going to be moving on, and then she has this real talent for singing, and she's sort of deciding whether or not to pursue that or stay and sort of work with her family and help her family out because they so desperately need her. But it's just one of those films that sort of sucker you in, and you know, you are starting to relate to this family. There's some really strong performances, and you know, it's maybe one of those where you look at it and go, I would never have considered that like an awards contender. Like, I know we had the Sound of Metal a few years ago, and it sort of dealt with the same sort of themes, and that was talked about for potential Best Picture at the Oscar, and I think that's because the theme was just so new and you know, it had never been touched. But the director of Coda, she approached it in such a respectful manner and gave us a great insight into that family's life and you know, the problems and the struggles that they have. And I think it's with those relationships that I sort of overlooked any of the sort of Disney Channel film vibes to it, the real cheesy, you know, attitude, the sort of, it's almost like the Karate Kid in a way. You have that mentorship with her music teacher and everything like that, but it just has a lot of heart, and I sort of came away from it, you know, really happy that I'd watched it and experienced it. So, but you know, we look at the other contenders up for Best Picture, and with everything that's went on at the Oscars at the minute, no one's talking about the likes of Belfast. It's very rarely mentioned. Poor Kenneth Branagh hasn't even got a shout in the last few weeks, and that's probably due to the sort of success of Coda and everything else.
Okay, well look, we'll give a shout out to Kenneth Branagh. So well done on Best Original Screenplay. I'm nearly certain we did give you a mention on last week's show, so we'll not forget you, Sir Kenneth. You are one of Belfast's own. But anyway, back to Coda. So I like this film, and I can see that there will be people in maybe 5-10 years might be critical that it won Best Film, in the same way that people look at films like Driving Miss Daisy or even The Artist, in that sense that were those films really the best pictures of that year. I said in last week's show, when we talked about the Academy Awards, I think The Power of the Dog is a fantastic piece of cinema. Yes, it's on Netflix, and it's weird that these films aren't being seen on the big screen, but I think Coda is so accessible, and I think too many people get sneery at that. When a film tries to tell a small story, it can have a very big effect, and it's a film about family, and I know that's cheesy and can be a bit Derry-lee, but that's what it's all about. But there are some genuinely beautiful moments in this film. There is a sequence, and it's not a spoiler to say, there's a sequence where we have a choir performing, and we have Ruby's family in attendance. And it's also quite funny because they're there supporting their daughter. They can't hear what's going on. So people are around them are engrossed and touched and kind of clapping along with the music. They're there signing to each other about what they want to have for dinner. Do you want to have spaghetti? It's funny, but then it's also beautiful in that, because only moments later we have the whole sound removed and we just experience what it would be like to be in that auditorium as a member of the deaf community. And we think about, I know it's a bit of a transgression, it's what we do at BanterFlix. We think back in the last year with Rose Aileen Ellis on Strictly Come Dancing, kind of bringing awareness to the deaf community. If a film does cast a spotlight on these things, I think that's what it will be remembered more. Yes, the film, I don't think, as a piece of cinema, in my own humble opinion, I don't think it is the best piece of cinematic output in the past 12 months. But for what it's doing and for what it's given in its sense of representation and letting people, I've always talked about this, people want to see themselves represented on the big screen. That's where we want to see those stories, and I think that's where Coda's legacy will be. It's feel good, it puts a smile on your face, and let's not belittle that. In the last 2-3 years that we've had, and particularly all that's going on right now within Ukraine, films like Coda are important. I will not belittle its Academy Award win, but I would definitely recommend anyone seek it out. It's a shame it didn't get a cinematic release. I think that possibly in the wake of its Academy success, we might see it on the big screen, and I would definitely recommend seeking it out. And with that, let's move from the digital realm to the physical realm and wrap up this week's show with our DVD of the week.
Flying out into the darkness to fight ghosts.
What do you mean?
They all die fighting Spider-Man. It's their fate. I'm sorry, kid.
Yeah, me too.
Don't.
Look, there has to be another way.
There isn't. They're a danger to our universe.
You're not gonna take this away from me.
You're struggling.
So that's a look at Spider-Man No Way Home. Darren, 3 is the magic number. I guess we're allowed to mention now, after a period of time, that there are 3 Spider-Men in Spider-Man No Way Home. We have Tobey Maguire, we have Andrew Garfield, and we have Tom Holland. I'm sorry if that is a spoiler, but it's kind of out there now. It's been in popular culture. The film's been out since December, but I guess we're allowed to talk about that now. When we reviewed the show just before Christmas, we tried our best to kind of talk over, would they or wouldn't they? It's not April, it's out in DVD. I guess we can mention the fact that in Spider-Man No Way Home, we have 3 generations of Spider-Men on screen fighting against a generation of Spider-Man villains on screen. Darren, what do you think?
Yeah, Spider-Man No Way Home is one of those films, unlike Morbius, it is made to be enjoyed. It is for the fans. There's a lot of fan service in it. It is a great I know they talked about this being the final of a trilogy with Tom Holland, and there's maybe going to be another trilogy to come, but as far as the last film in the trilogy goes, it's one of the greatest. Now, don't get me wrong, the start of it, there's a lot of backstory, a lot of catching up to do for people that maybe don't sort of remember what happened in all these Marvel films happening, but really just one of those films you just sit down and you'll be smiling the whole way right to the end. But there are some wallops, some emotional scenes, and a few bumps along the way, but you'll be all right. You'll enjoy it.
Yeah, I'm a fan of this film. I know that Alan Meeben, when he was on the end of year show, was not a huge fan of Spider-Man No Way Home, but he had never watched any films within the franchise in the various incarnations of the Spider-Man on screen. And I guess it's a very dense film to just kind of tread your toe within the franchise. It's not just your friendly neighborhood Spider anymore. There's a whole the whole baggage of the MCU that we get. I enjoyed it for what it was. It was a film I enjoyed even more so watching it in the cinema with an audience. The audience I was there, they whooped at the right parts, they cheered, they got emotional at certain sequences, as you've alluded to, Darren, and it was great to have that back. And it's a film that just did scary numbers at the box office. But I will say this, because I know we're pushed for time, and it'll be interesting to see what you think about this, Darren. For all the success of the film, and it is great to see, you know, Garfield, Maguire and Holland on screen together. The thing that makes Spider-Man No Way Home work, and what made me enjoy even more on my rewatch, isn't all its use of nostalgia and all its little Easter egg nods that people have went on YouTube and kind of debunked, but I will say two words: William Dafoe. William Dafoe as Norman Osborn is worth the price of your cinema ticket. If you're gonna go out and buy this on DVD or Blu-ray, the man, I don't know what age he is, he must be in his 60s. He did all his own stunts, and he is proof that when you have an on-screen presence like he does, and you let him just go full villain in this film, I just enjoyed he is the pantomime villain of pantomime villains in this film. He just is someone he sneers in the right way, he's someone you want to boo and hiss at, and he's just unrepentantly evil. And that is what I wanted from my villain. So, you know, I know we talked a lot about the Spider-Men. Let's give a shout out for the villains. William Dafoe, I know there's Alfred Molina, there's a few of them in there. Yes, we've Jamie Foxx back, but we'll not talk about that too much. Yeah. But William Dafoe is excellent in this film.
Dafoe, yes, I fully agree. And only recently I watched The Lighthouse too, and he has those same traits where he can go from sort of, you almost feel sorry for him, and you know, he's a frail old man, and then he just snaps and suddenly he's demonic and he's manic and he's running through walls and, you know, destroying things. But yeah, absolutely. And Alfred Molina too, again, has that quality where he can just flick a switch and, you know, send you either way. But yeah, definitely, you know, it's Tom Holland he was spoiled with villains, and, you know, brings it back to Morbius as well. There wasn't that balance. Far From Home, you are completely spoiled with choices for villains there.
I think of the two comic book movies, it is my preferred of the two, but that does bring us on to the last part of this week's show as we pick our movie of the week. It's going to be interesting to see what we go with. You know, will Morbius take home the title this week? I don't know, but Darren, it's just a two-header this week. What's your movie of the week? Of the three we've discussed here this evening, what would you recommend our viewers seek out the most?
I would say go with Coda for this week's choice, and not because we're, you know, bigging up Apple TV Plus here, as we mentioned before, but just because of the feel-good factor, and I guess the makers of the film, you know, if they want to inspire or help one person out there maybe going through something similar, that's their job done. So yeah, the more we can spread that, the better.
Well, look, last week we had a 3 for 3. This week we have a 2 for 2. Because I'm going to agree with Coda. I think Spider-Man No Way Home, it has a lot of fanfare. It has a lot of fanfare already, and it's a film that we've championed here tonight. And if you are a fan of comic book movies, then yes, I think it's up there with some of the best that the MCU has produced. But my movie of the week is, without a doubt, it's Coda. I liked it when I first saw it. I liked it even more when I rewatched it. Yes, I'm surprised it's the best film, but it's just an unrepentantly joyous piece of cinema that the thing it wants to try and do is put a smile on your face. And as I've already mentioned earlier on, in this day and age, that is a thing that is to be applauded. So yeah, my film of the week, like you, Darren, is Coda. But that is all we've time for. So all that's left for me to do is thank my guests. So thank you very much, Darren.
Thanks very much.
And thanks very much for watching at home. We'll be back next week with another episode. But for now, until then, goodbye.